China Center. My name is Miles Yu. I'm the Senior Fellow and Director of China Center here at the Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C. Today, we are extremely honored to have one of the true British exports to the world, Mr. Ben Rogers, and another one being, of course, James Bond. He's the international man, and there's no person more internationally known who has done more to international human rights than Mr. Benedict Rogers of the UK. So Ben is the human rights activist and he's a writer. He has written 7 books. He specializes in Asia. He's a co-founder and chief executive officer of Hong Kong Watch, senior analyst for East Asia at Christian Solidarity Worldwide, an advisor to the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, the Stop Uyghur Genocide Campaign, and several other charities. He's also deputy chair of the UK Conservative Party's Human Rights Commission, and his human rights work over the last several decades has covered countries like Burma, North Korea, Indonesia, the Maldives, East Timor, Pakistan, and of course, Hong Kong. So we are very delighted to have Mr. Rogers join us today to talk about a variety of issues, mostly concerning Hong Kong. So Ben, welcome, and thank you for participating.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a great honor to be with you.
Yeah, let me just start by asking you a personal question. You have been heavily traveled, and you've done a lot of human rights advocacy in Asia. How do you get involved in Hong Kong?
Well, I got involved with Hong Kong in 2 ways. Firstly, when I was 18 years old, I took a year between high school and university, and I went to teach English in China in the city of Qingdao, and had a very happy 6 months in Qingdao, made many friends there. At the end of those 6 months, I made a visit to Hong Kong, and that was my first experience of Hong Kong. But then a few years later, when I graduated from university, I was looking for a job. My dream job was to go into journalism in Asia. And a job came up in Hong Kong, and I spent my first 5 years of my career, which happened to be the first 5 years after the handover, living and working in Hong Kong.
Excellent, excellent. So, when you were in Qingdao, in addition to enjoying the famous beer there, what was the significant event that really impressed you about the people in Qingdao and particularly the unique city there? Because I myself have been there several times, mostly with the U.S. Navy delegation there to visit the Chinese Navy. But I think Qingdao is a very unique city.
It is. It's a beautiful city. I mean, I was very struck by how the old historic city was built by the Germans and feels very much like a European city architecturally. And of course, it's by the sea with lovely beaches. But the other thing that struck me about the people there at that time, and this was about 3 years after the Tiananmen Square massacre, so this was 92, 93, people in the privacy of their homes, not in public so much, but in private, a lot of people were really eager to talk to me about the political situation, about their frustrations with the Chinese Communist Party, their desire for change. And I was quite surprised by how freely many people spoke to me, at least in private.
That's amazing because Tiananmen massacre took place in 1989. When you were in Qingdao, the memories must be much fresher than today. But even today, 34 years later, people in China still have not forgotten about it because there has never been accountability for what happened in Tiananmen Square and across China in 1989. Speaking of anniversary, today is another solemn anniversary of some sort, especially about Hong Kong. That is, today marks the 3rd anniversary of the national security law in Hong Kong that was imposed by the Beijing government on the people of Hong Kong 3 years ago. This marks obviously a turning point in Hong Kong's history. This is basically, a symbolic turning point of Hong Kong losing all its high degree of autonomy. So let's go back a little bit in history. The most important document signed by the British government and Chinese government, of course, in the last several decades was the 1984 Sino-British Declaration. That is about the condition under which Hong Kong will be handed over to the Chinese Communist Party in 1997. First of all, this unique document. Could you tell us a little bit more about this document itself and why it is important?
Well, I believe it's an incredibly important document because it was the treaty negotiated between the British and Chinese governments, signed, of course, by Margaret Thatcher on the British side and I believe Jiao Ziyang on the Chinese side, but as a result of negotiations with Deng Xiaoping himself. And it paves the way for the principle of one country, two systems, which was the principle on which Hong Kong was handed over to China, and contains promises that China made to keep and maintain and protect Hong Kong's way of life, basic freedoms, high degree of autonomy, at least for the first 50 years from the time of the handover, so at least until 2047. And it is an international treaty. It's registered at the United Nations. And I would say today, China has completely not just broken, but actually torn up that treaty halfway through its lifespan.
You're right. So it is legally binding in your view. And I believe the UK government also still holds that position because it was registered in the United Nations as an international treaty in 1985. So the Chinese government basically, rejected that position of its own by saying now it's a historic treaty, therefore it doesn't really apply. Now, the declaration itself is very interesting. You mentioned about the one country, two systems. I went back and looked at it, and because the declaration declares the current social and economic systems will remain unchanged for 50 years, as you say, following the handovers from 1997 onward. That would be good until 2047, as would its existing rights. Now, those rights were specifically listed as freedoms and lifestyle, and they include rights and freedoms of the person, of speech, of the press, of assembly, of travel, of movement, of correspondence, of strike, of choice of occupation, and of academic research and of religious belief. That's pretty comprehensive. So collectively, we call it a high degree of autonomy. Yes, the sovereign rights of Hong Kong would go to China, but the lifestyle, and social, political, and judicial system will remain distinct from the Chinese system, which is communist. And that's a solemn promise. The promise has been broken. So, and also I think this declaration of 1984 also said the government of Hong Kong will be composed of local inhabitants. And its chief executive will be appointed by the Beijing government on the basis of the result of elections to be held in Hong Kong. So none of this, of course, has ever happened. In your view, Ben, how much of the rights promised have remained in Hong Kong today?
I would say today, as a result of the very draconian national security law imposed 3 years ago, very, very little. Indeed, if any, the Beijing has never honored the promise to have proper elections for the chief executive in Hong Kong's basic law, the mini constitution. there is a provision for universal suffrage, but that was never implemented. But as a result of the national security law, really freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, all of those basic freedoms have been destroyed. And the vast majority of pro-democracy campaigners who were very outspoken until 2020 have effectively been silenced. Most of them are either in prison or in exile. And if they're not in prison or in exile, they're keeping their heads down very understandably. Most civil society organizations have disbanded, even trade unions have been forced to disband. And really, there's almost nothing left of the freedoms. And of course, the rule of law and the independence of the judiciary has gone as well. The judiciary certainly now is heavily politicized, and there have been several instances where the Hong Kong government, when the courts have exercised some level of independence, the Hong Kong government's tried to overturn their judgments. So Hong Kong today has been transformed from one of the most open cities in Asia to essentially a police state.
That's a very serious and kind of a sad report on the current conditions of Hong Kong. I myself have visited Hong Kong many times. I love that city. I have some friends there, and as you know, I work under the Trump administration in the State Department, working as Secretary Pompeo's China policy advisor. There's nothing that's actually heartbreaking for me to work on the Hong Kong case as it happened at the time, because in 2020, Secretary of State Pompeo, with heavy heart, certified to the U.S. Congress that the high degree of autonomy in Hong Kong has gone. And as a result of China's heavy-handed approach to Hong Kong and crackdown on basic rights promised in the 1984 Declaration and the following basic laws. So I understand that the United Kingdom has obviously a unique relationship with Hong Kong. UK has a special relationship with Hong Kong. And feels a unique sense of responsibility, having governed this territory for somewhere more than 150 years, and facilitates its rise to the position of being a major financial center in the world. So how is it that the UK government right now thinks about what it can do to Hong Kong and to the people of Hong Kong? I know the UK government, after the tragedy of 2021, 2022, has accepted a lot of Hong Kong citizens as residents. Could you tell us a little bit more about how the UK government responded to the dramatic sad events of Hong Kong in the last several years?
Yes, certainly. I think on the positive side, I would give the UK government a lot of credit for the British National Overseas Visa Scheme that they announced actually on the very day, or the day after the national security law was imposed. So they announced on the 1st of July, Boris Johnson was Prime Minister at the time, and he stood up in Parliament and announced that because China has breached the joint declaration, we would introduce a pathway for Hong Kongers with this British National Overseas status to come to the UK. And that offers a lifeline to potentially up to as many as 3 million Hong Kongers, or maybe up to 5 million if you include family and dependents. Now, about somewhere around 160,000, I believe, have taken it up already. But it does offer a real lifeline for people to get out and to build a new future in freedom in Britain. My criticism of the British government is that while on the one hand they've done the right thing in that regard, and we had advocated for that, and I think the government went further than I dared expect them to go. On the other hand, they have not imposed any measures as consequences for China's breach of the joint declaration. So there have been no sanctions. We actually, Hong Kong Watch has made a submission to the British government advocating for sanctioning John Lee, the chief executive of Hong Kong, as a start. But so far, the UK has not imposed any sanctions. In contrast to the United States, which under Secretary Pompeo, and I'm sure thanks largely to your efforts and your colleagues, the US acted very quickly to impose sanctions. Britain has not, and that's my criticism of my government. I think that when a country breaches a treaty in that way, there should be consequences.
Now, obviously, we can always appreciate some sensitive issues with regard to sanctioning. So the U.S., as you mentioned, we sanctioned the major figures in the Hong Kong government in crackdown on basic human rights and autonomy, from chief executive all the way down to executive officers of that government. We also sanctioned pretty much everybody involved in the Chinese National People's Congress. I mean, many of these vice chairmen have been sanctioned on the specific issue of taking away Hong Kong's rights and autonomy. Tell us a little bit more about Hong Kong Watch. What have you done, and what's the goal of your organization?
Well, the goal, I think, has changed somewhat as the situation has changed. So I co-founded Hong Kong Watch in 2017. I should say that if I go back a little bit earlier, my political engagement with Hong Kong began in 2014 when the umbrella movement in Hong Kong was happening. And I saw the very courageous protests in 2014. And I felt that as somebody who had lived in Hong Kong, had begun my career in Hong Kong, and was working in human rights, I had a responsibility to speak out for Hong Kong. So initially, I started speaking out just in a personal capacity on my own, sort of in my spare time. And then by 2017, I realized that it was no longer sustainable to do it just on my own. I needed an organization and a team to do this. And so came together with others to launch Hong Kong Watch. Hong Kong Watch was actually given an unexpected bit of publicity even before we had launched it, because in October 2017, 2 months before we were going to launch the organization, I tried to make a visit to Hong Kong and found that I was denied entry on the orders of Beijing very publicly. And I was possibly the first Westerner, or one of the first Westerners, to have that happen. There have been others since me, but and my case was raised at the time by the Foreign Secretary, who was Boris Johnson. It was raised in both houses of Parliament. It was also raised in the US Congress by Congressman Chris Smith. And that generated quite a lot of unexpected publicity around Hong Kong Watch. We launched Hong Kong Watch on the 10th of December, International Human Rights Day, 2017. And the original intention of Hong Kong Watch was to defend one country, two systems, because at that time we could see that it was under threat, but it had not yet completely gone at that point. Now we've had to change our objectives because we have to acknowledge one country, two systems has gone. And our objective now is, I would say, twofold. Firstly, to keep the spotlight on Hong Kong, especially on those who are in prison, and to make sure that people like Jimmy Lai and Joshua Wong and many others are not forgotten, that the spotlight is kept on them, so that at least, even if we can't secure their release, at least we could hopefully prevent further mistreatment, hopefully prevent the possibility of them being transferred into mainland China, and mitigate the circumstances. And within that, we also are advocating for sanctions and for consequences for what China has done. The other part of our work that was not part of our original plan, but has developed because of the circumstances, is assisting Hong Kongers who have left Hong Kong, and particularly helping them to settle in the UK and also in Canada. and helping them to understand our political systems so that they can engage with our political systems and know their civic and political rights in our countries. And the organization has grown. We started literally with, I was doing it in my spare time. We had one part-time employee in 2017. We now have a staff of 9 people. I'm full-time. And we have a lot of work, not just in London, but we're very active in Washington, DC. We've just launched a Canadian chapter of Hong Kong Watch in Canada. We engage with the European Union, the United Nations, and other countries around the world.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. I think, your organization has done a tremendous job. And I think also, in a way, that helps some governments reevaluate their policy toward Hong Kong. In my personal case, each year the U.S. government has to report to the U.S. Congress about the situation in Hong Kong. Basically, in light of it's a mandated report as part of the 1992 United States Hong Kong Policy Act. So each year, the Secretary of State is mandated to submit a report to Congress to see how much of the high degree of autonomy is still there in Hong Kong. So when I was working for Secretary Pompeo, each year we have to gather information. So from the field and from oral sources, and I think we get a lot of documents from your center, from a lot of grassroots NGOs in Hong Kong, and also, of course, hear voices from the brave human rights campaigners such as Jimmy Lai and other people who are now languishing in the draconian Hong Kong police system. So one of the very important approach we realized of the Chinese government's governing of Hong Kong is to capture the Hong Kong elites. So they really pay attention. They really care about what's going on the grassroots level. As in other words, the China spent an enormous amount of its assets, political, financial, and cultural, on the tycoons, the real estate businesses owners, and some of the very wealthy at the top. And they control try to control the legislative processes and definitely the chief executive offices. So I would say, the such neglect of what the masses were thinking and what their demands are was partially responsible for the outbreak of the popular protest against the Chinese government's handling of Hong Kong and the erosion of Hong Kong's freedom and autonomy. So in your sense, how much of that kind of grassroots resistance is still there, even though kind of sub rosa in today's Hong Kong?
Yes, I mean, first of all, I agree entirely with your point about the capture of the elite. And we published a report, one of our earliest reports in Hong Kong Watch was a report on what we called red capital, the influence of the CCP's economic intrusion into Hong Kong and economic coercion in Hong Kong. And that enabled them to carry out the crackdown they've conducted. In terms of the situation today, I think that within the hearts of Hong Kongers, the resistance is still strong. But of course, it's incredibly dangerous now for Hong Kongers to do anything. There are some very brave Hong Kongers still who continue to speak out. For example, on June the 4th, the anniversary of the Tiananmen massacre, where it used to be possible until just a few years ago, Hong Kong was the only part of the PRC where the anniversary could be commemorated. Victoria Park, there used to be big candlelit vigils with thousands of people. Now that's completely banned, but still, even this year, there were Hong Kongers who did simple but creative acts like holding a candle, and they were arrested for it. There was even a car that had a license plate that I think said 4689 or yeah, exactly. And that car was impounded. So definitely people still try to find creative ways to express themselves at great risk, but it's incredibly difficult. And I think the role of the diaspora now is incredibly important, because the diaspora is really the only place where Hong Kongers can speak out freely. And even for the diaspora, it's not easy, because there are repercussions or fear of repercussions for those who may have family back in Hong Kong. Even in the UK, we've had 2 incidents where Hong Kongers have been physically assaulted, one at the Chinese consulate in Manchester, and then more recently on June the 4th, not June the 4th, on June the 12th, the anniversary of the one of the major protests in 2019, there was a rally in Southampton in England, and some Hong Kongers were attacked by mainland Chinese students afterwards. So even in the diaspora, it's not entirely safe, but it is at least more free, and that's where I think the voice of Hong Kongers can most effectively be heard.
Yeah. Oh, here in Washington, D.C., there are some very active young Hong Kong activists, and they constantly talk to us and share their great insights and their bravery and their just spirit have never been wiped out. And I think, that's very hopeful. Of course, the road is going to be much longer. Now, let me switch to another slightly different angle. You wrote a fantastic book. It's called the China Nexus. And thank you very much for giving me the copy of that. And in the book, you dedicated this book to for all the peoples living under the Chinese Communist Party regime's repression or threat in China, East Turkestan, Tibet, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Myanmar, North Korea, and beyond for freedom. So that's a tremendous dedication. Now, that also indicated that your focus is not just about Hong Kong, it's not about one particular region. You focus on the wide area of human rights abuse and championing for freedom's cause. In your view, just go beyond Hong Kong confine and in the entire Asia region that you have been involved, what do you think there are some kind of common threats in human rights situation and some of the most salient points that you can make in your long career for championing for human rights?
Well, I think, first of all, obviously, within other parts of the territory that is under Chinese sovereignty today, one has to remember the Uyghurs, Tibet, and the human rights crackdown across mainland China, the repression of dissidents and lawyers and religious practitioners. And, there was a time in the when I was traveling regularly in China in the 1990s and the early 2000s, where I was a little bit more optimistic about the situation in China, because there did appear to be some, of course, limited, but some limited space for civil society, for some degree of religious practice, for Chinese human rights lawyers who were able to take on cases. And of course, there were restrictions and repression, but there did appear to be that space. And I met people who talked about it, and all of that space now has disappeared pretty much under Xi Jinping. But if you look beyond China's borders, the Chinese Communist Party is really the single body that is keeping alive the brutal dictatorships in Myanmar or Burma and in North Korea. Without the support of Beijing, economically, militarily, and diplomatically, those two regimes would not be able to continue the crimes against humanity that they themselves are perpetrating. So I think that's a key point. And in the book, I have a chapter on Myanmar and a chapter on North Korea. And then, of course, one has to think of Taiwan and what the future for Taiwan is. And I think it's absolutely vital that the free world makes it very clear that we stand with Taiwan, because I think the threat from Beijing towards Taiwan is getting more concerning every day.
That's a great point. I guess that what you're trying to say is that China is a state sponsor of human rights abuse across the region, just like as Iran as the state sponsored terrorism for the larger region of the Middle East. The one country, two systems formula was designed by Deng Xiaoping and has been repeated by the ensuing Communist Party leadership as an exemplary model that first practiced in Hong Kong, but their ultimate target actually is Taiwan. They can say to the Taiwanese, "Hey, listen, we can do this successfully in Hong Kong." But now that the formula has failed miserably in Hong Kong because of its inner contradictions. You cannot have one communist dictatorship, and that will never allow diversity and political pluralism and to rule over a country, over a region that has the kind of democratic genes in there. What is the Hong Kong's failure of what is the failure of one country, two systems in Hong Kong? What can you tell us about its application for Taiwan?
I think the main thing that it can tell us is that the Chinese Communist Party can never be trusted. Its promises in an international treaty are not worth the paper they're written on, because it has completely broken its promises in Hong Kong. If Beijing had honored its promises and really kept one country, two systems alive and well in Hong Kong, then that might have served actually as potentially quite an attractive model especially for those in Taiwan who are sympathetic to the idea of unification with China. But I think today, even those who are who have that wish are not attracted by the idea of one country, two systems, because they know it's been broken and Beijing doesn't keep its promises. So I think the opinion polls in Taiwan show today that the vast majority of Taiwanese people reject that model and reject the idea of any kind of unification and want, at the very least, the status quo to continue.
Absolutely, and then we often say, before this crackdown in Hong Kong, we often say that Hong Kong can be a beacon of freedom for people in mainland China, and that's a political statement. Hong Kong, for all practical purposes, actually has served the Chinese Communist Party tremendously well, and it can use Hong Kong as a sort of a hub through which to get much of the Western capital and the Western technology. So economically, financially, Hong Kong has many practical usefulness for China, much of usefulness for China. But of course, the Chinese Communist Party always places the political security above everything else. So that's why the Hong Kong's role as some kind of the beacon of freedom and individual thinking has threatened the Chinese regime. And I think right now, Taiwan is facing the similar situation where most of people inside China aspire to live as free people, like the 23 million people in Taiwan. So that's one of the reasons that you see. I think the Taiwanese politics has been fundamentally affected by what's going on, not necessarily inside Taiwan, but also outside of Taiwan. In the last 5-6 years, I think two events that really fundamentally shaped the Taiwanese domestic politics. That is the one in Hong Kong, right? Hong Kong's loss of autonomy has absolutely shocked the conscience of people in Taiwan. Taiwanese incumbent President Tsai Ing-wen, her major vote getting point in the previous election was her strong support for the people of Hong Kong, and that was very important. Another event, obviously, was what's going on in Ukraine, because Taiwan and Ukraine feel much of the sort of shared fate, shared destiny in the defense of sovereignty, independence, and freedom. So, in your view, Hong Kong as a freewheeling free port, what's your prediction about what might happen to Hong Kong's future? I understand the Chinese Communist government has an iron grip role, sort of rule over Hong Kong. But as you say, Hong Kong is not any unlike many of the Chinese provinces, because Hong Kong has, after all, has many years of freedom. Once people feel they taste freedom, it's very hard to forget about it. And Hong Kong also has much of the private spaces that mainlanders could not enjoy. For example, the church played a very important role there. I think the beginning of the collapse of the Soviet system in Eastern Europe has something to do with this. There is sort of a very limited space within the Catholic Church, and from where freedom and desire for democracy began to spread. What's your take on the future of Hong Kong? And is there any way that those limited, extremely limited private spaces in Hong Kong could expand and come back?
I think that's a really important question. On the one hand, I think if things continue on the current trajectory, Hong Kong is almost certainly going to end up as simply another Chinese city. Its autonomy and its basic freedoms have been stripped away, even economically, which is perhaps the only way that one country, two systems still exists. Even that is disappearing, as the intention is to integrate Hong Kong into the Greater Bay area and become simply part of the much larger Southern China economic zone. So that, I think, is the path that Beijing wants, and the path that's very likely in the short to medium term. But I also think, as you say, that Hong Kongers are people who love freedom, who've proven several times in recent decades that they're prepared to stand for freedom. And I think that they will find creative ways to continue to show dissent. I have mixed feelings about the role of the church in Hong Kong. I wish it could be the case that the church could play a similar role to the one it did in Eastern Europe. And of course, with people like Cardinal Zen, it certainly could. But there are unfortunately many in the church leadership that appear to have taken a path of compromise. And I also think that religious freedom is the next freedom to go in Hong Kong. Freedom of worship currently still exists in the sense that you can go to places of worship, to churches, on the surface seemingly freely, but already sermons are being self-censored, people are being under heavy surveillance, church schools, I think, are coming under pressure from the national security law curriculum in the education system. So the church's position is under a lot of threat, and there are mixed opinions among the church leadership. But I think in the long term, essentially Hong Kong's future is indisputably and inseparably linked to China's future and Beijing's future, in the sense that change will only really come to Hong Kong when there is change in Beijing. And when that day comes and there is some political change in Beijing, then we may see the courageous Hong Kongers who may have had to keep their heads down in the interim, but we'll see them seizing the opportunity when they can.
That was a very good summary. Thank you. Now, you mentioned about Hong Kong cannot be free unless China is free. You're absolutely right. In the West, there has been some kind of naive belief that somehow if we engage China vigorously, economically, culturally, and the Chinese Communist Party would change. So this is so-called engagement policy. That policy has been universally declared as a failure. So now we're talking about a Chinese communist regime that basically holds on to its own cardinal principles of dictatorship and Marxism-Leninism. Yet China is unlike the Soviet Union. China is very, very heavily involved internationally in the free trade system. So in other words, there has been a very strong external connection with China. And that's probably is going to be the next battlefield. That is to hope China to change from within has not worked. Probably there will be another way of impacting the change inside China from the international arena, because China is connected with the free trade system. Chinese economy, its military, are heavily dependent upon Western free market and technologies. So that's probably one of the few leverages we have left. Hopefully that will work. But Hong Kong is even more so because Hong Kong has long been an international free port before the Chinese Communist Party took total control. And Hong Kong obviously has, as you said, has a very active diaspora. I mean, I have been approached by many, many people in the United States who are continuing their fight for preserving and returning Hong Kong's freedom and autonomy. Many of them are pretty dedicated, very dedicated, and they're quite effective. People like Elmar Yuan and some of the young people who have been doing great work in the West to exert change sort of Hong Kong, because Hong Kong government knows also that without its connection with the international market, with the international system, it really cannot survive for much longer. So what do you think? What's your view about the sort of external impact for NGOs and their role in Hong Kong diaspora on sort of putting much pressure on the Hong Kong government to sort of force some changes onto the government?
I think the role of the diaspora and NGOs is very important. I think that not only in putting pressure on the Hong Kong government, but actually putting pressure on our own governments as well. I think in the UK, I'm concerned that there is seems to be a tendency in the current British government to wish to get back to business as usual with China. And, you know, we've had the Hong Kong Secretary for Financial Services visiting London a few months ago. We had the British Trade Minister visiting Hong Kong. And I think that there would not have been a fuss made about those two visits if it hadn't been for NGOs like Hong Kong Watch and others. So we used the opportunity of those visits to highlight, for example, the fact that the Hong Kong government has effectively stolen the pension funds of Hong Kongers who are coming to the UK under the BNO scheme. They've denied those Hong Kongers access to withdraw their pension funds. And when we learned that the Hong Kong Financial Services Secretary was coming to London, of course, we briefed the media. We organized a protest outside the Guildhall in London where he was speaking. And we used the opportunity to put pressure both on the Hong Kong government and on the British government. And the British government, to their credit, did then raise this issue with him in their meetings with him. So I think we civil society and the diaspora has a big responsibility to remind our governments of the issues they should be raising and the actions they should be taking. And, you know, on just one last point on your point about engagement, which I entirely agree with. it's interesting that from what I've seen of Secretary Blinken's visit to Beijing just these past few days, it seems to be held up as a success, the fact that he had a meeting with Xi Jinping, or a success that he had the visit. And to me, I'm not against engagement in the sense that, of course, we have to talk to Beijing. It's too big a power to not talk to them. But the question for me is, how do we talk to them, with what objectives, on whose terms, and about what? And that engagement needs to be accompanied by pressure and action. And so my question from Secretary Blinken's visit is not, did he meet Xi Jinping? My question is, what did he say to Xi Jinping, and what action is the US administration going to follow up with following that visit? So I think engagement always needs to be accompanied by pressure, by action, and the diaspora and NGOs can play an important role in reminding our governments of that.
Absolutely. China is a big country. It cannot be ignored, but we have to engage China on our term, on freedom's term. With that, thank you, Ben, and for your tremendous work. And I think, your work has actually change the policy, or impact policy in a very positive way. As you mentioned earlier, the British government actually does listen to you. That's the beauty of democracy, right? You mentioned about going back to business. I was much encouraged by your former Prime Minister Liz Truss visit to Taiwan, where she made a very, very strong statement. And I think the voices like that are all needed. And once again, this book by Benedict Rogers, China Nexus, buy it. It's really good. And thank you, Ben, for your great work, for participating in today's panel, and hope to have you back again at the Hudson Institute.